Okay, so good morning and welcome to this Countryside Hop session on pasture for life as a feasible future livestock option. And what we're going to be looking at this morning, hopefully, is the the feasibility of pasture for life, so 100% pasture-fed ruminants as an option in the UK going forward. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Lisa Norton and Dr. Lawrence Smith, both of whom have been working with Pasture for Life for a number of years now, exploring the types of systems that our farmers run and understanding how they relate to the wider livestock context, both in the UK and more broadly in Europe. We're going to hear from Lisa first, and we're then going to hear from Lawrence, both about research projects that they've either completed and are just publishing, or projects that are ongoing. Both of and a number of those projects also include Pasture for Life farmers and Pasture for Life staff. And then we'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Now, we haven't set this up as a webinar format. This is an open discussion space. So when we are opening up for questions, feel free, if you want to, you can actually ask those, or you can use the chat. So more than happy to facilitate questions through the chat, or once we get to the Q&A session, feel free, once you put your hand up and you're invited to speak, to unmute and speak if you're comfortable to do so. So I think that's all of the kind of housekeeping. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa, who's going to kick us off, maybe just introducing herself a little bit more and the work that she's been doing.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, I'm going to put the first slide up. We'll get that started. So while that's happening, hopefully, that up for everyone. Yes, I work at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and we used to be part of government. So if you know about the British Geological Society or the British Antarctic Survey, the UK CEH is the kind of equivalent for land and fresh water in the UK. So we're a real data collection organisation, do a lot of monitoring, but we also have a lot of scientists who do independent work. So the project I'm going to talk to you about is a particular project that I put together with colleagues, including Lawrence. He was at the Organic Research Centre when we started, but by the time we finished, I think he'd done 2 moves and he was at Reading. So if it was down to him, there'd be even more logos across the bottom there, but haven't done that. But we had colleagues from Lancaster University and the Scottish Rural College, and then you'll see a whole load of different banners there. And these were all partners who we were keen to involve in the research because we thought that they had a real stake in it, really. So Innovative Farmers, Agroecology, Sustainable Food Trust, Natural England. And the project was part of a UK Research Council initiative under a badge of global food security. So it was really looking at how our food systems could be much more sustainable going forward. So the talk is called How Can Ruminants Fit into Future Food Systems? And it focuses on that specific project, which was called, it's a big mouthful, Sustainable Economic and Ecological Grazing Systems, Learning from Innovative Practitioners. In short, SEEG-SLIP. So it's not going to move now. Hang on. Sorry. Trying to move to my next. Oh, there you go. There it goes. 3 ahead. So based on the fact that we need transformational change in our food systems, SEEG-SLIP asks particular research questions. You may say, why do we need transformational change? Well, because of the environmental impacts of our food systems more broadly, particularly fertilizers and pesticides, but also intense management impacts on water quality and air quality, on biodiversity particularly, but also on climate and carbon, as you'll no doubt have heard. So SEEG-SLIP was asking the questions about to what extent innovations in ruminant livestock systems could support improved ecological, social and economic sustainability. So we wanted to actually question whether the innovations that the PFLA farmers were introducing were actually a lever to shift these food systems away from more damaging ones and towards much more benign agricultural systems that actually can support biodiversity and the production of, I suppose, ecosystem goods. I hope it's not going to keep doing that. So you'll know, it is. Oh gosh, I'm sorry about that. I should have changed the presentation. Lesson to Lawrence, quickly sort out your slides. So Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, you'll know, hopefully, membership organisation that champions the unique regenerative role of ruminant animals and grazed habitats. And it was established as a community interest company in 2011. This is a slightly dated slide, so probably Nikki could tell me that the membership now includes well over 900 farmers, butchers, retailers, consumers, and has a set of certification standards. Sorry. So Lawrence actually put this slide together for me a while back, but it's looked at the sort of initiation of the PFLA a long time ago, well, 2009, at this chance meeting and conversation about grass-fed livestock at a conference, all the way through to 2019 and the 500th member. And you can see various things going on, the Google discussion group being one of the very early ones, but then certification, the Pasture for Life, It Can Be Done booklet in 2016, the poet who wrote The Soil Never Sleeps, and various other sort of way markers basically on this group of farmers starting together and taking themselves towards what has become actually a really successful organisation. And as a researcher for a long time, I've been looking at farmland and biodiversity impacts of farming management, and I've worked closely with groups of farmers trying to address environmental problems perhaps caused by their practices, or trying at least to evidence whether they were, and I learned through previous work that actually working with the farmers is the key way to move, to make change, because farmers are the people on the ground who actually can effect change. So I sort of thought about a systemic approach to this project, meaning that for many scientists, so as an ecologist, very often my science will be, I go and look at a field, I look at how many plant species I can see, I maybe take a soil sample, and then I go away and have a look at them. This project, I knew that what we really wanted to do was actually to understand from the farmers what they were doing in that field, why they were doing that, how long they'd been doing it, to consider how much money they were making, to think about what their lives were as farmers in that place. So to put all of the agroecology, which is the bit I would normally just go and take away, into the broader context of what was actually happening and why really, and also to think about the NGOs, the government bodies, the consumers and the retailers. We did do a little bit of consumer work, which I'm not going to present here, but I can tell you about if you want to. We also had a little sideline on meat quality, which was being done by Newcastle University, taking some of the samples from the farms. So yeah, it was a real attempt to try and look at things in its entirety, in context. It's messy science. That's why lots of scientists shy away from it and tend to cut out all the complex bits and stick with the simple bits. You get much more statistically rigorous results, and they're much easier to analyze and get results out of. But for me, they don't always reflect reality, and so this was an attempt to get the whole lot in there. So in the first year of the study, we looked at 56 farms. So I think it was 2018 or 2019. So at the time, PFLA were bringing new farms in all the time as members, and certifying them as producers. At that time, half of the 56 farms, all of which were members, were actually certified producers. We were targeting beef and sheep farms because that's what we wanted to look at. About 70% of the farms that we looked at were also sort of certified organic, but their sizes ranged enormously from 6 hectares to 1,228, as you can see there. We did a second supplementary study of 17 farms, and 15 of them were from the first year, and then 2 were new PFLA farms. So these are the farms which we collected soil and vegetation samples on, but we also did a lot of interviews on those farms, both social science ones and sort of management practice interviews. I'm so sorry about these slides doing this. So the ecological evaluation included the assessment of the grassland in a plot. That's actually me going on field work, which is a wonderful thing I don't get to do enough, and taking soil samples at the same time. And we decided that we would, in the same way as the big national survey that I've been involved in for decades, called the Countryside Survey, the GB Countryside Survey. And this is just a way of auditing the countryside to try and see what the state of our grasslands, what the state of all of our habitats are. But because most of our island is grassland, most of GB is grassland, we have an awful lot of plots that are from agricultural grassland. So we used exactly the same methods, which allowed us to sort of get a bit of context on the findings. Apologies for the silliness of the slides. So these are some of the graphs of the ecological condition of the pasture-fed livestock in this wider context of the Countryside Survey. So the map on the right shows all the places where we do Countryside Survey. We only actually compared grassland that was similar to the PFLA grassland. We didn't compare from all upland grassland. They were all from lowland grassland sites, in case you're thinking it doesn't look similar to the map that I've just shown you of the farms. But if you look at the graph, so if we look at the top left-hand corner, the one that says A in the right hand, total species richness, what it shows you is 3 bars. The first bar is Countryside Survey CS, improved grassland. So bizarrely, as an ecologist, improved grassland is what we call agriculturally improved grassland. You might think that when ecologists label habitats, they would be thinking of a nicer, improved being nicer, but actually it's usually not very nice from an ecological perspective. It's 70% or 60 to 70% ryegrass domination and very relatively few species. The CS neutral is Countryside Survey neutral grassland, which covers quite a range. So that's often been improved in the past, but maybe not been ploughed and resown for quite a while, or it may never have been. So it varies between some very rich grassland. You can see at the top, some of them will have up to 60 species in the plots. And then the PFLA one is the one on the right. So what the red star shows you is that the improved grassland, the bar on the left, is the one that's different out of those 3. So actually PFLA grassland is very much more like the neutral grassland than it is the improved grassland. So it resembles the less managed grassland. In terms of forb richness, so that's species that are not grasses, essentially dandelions, yarrow, buttercup, plantain, chicory, those kind of things. The forb richness, again, the improved, the bar on the left, is the one that has much lower forb richness than CS neutral or PFLA. So PFLA is again more similar to CS neutral grassland. The bottom 2 graphs show soil variables. So the bottom left is carbon concentration, and in that one you can see the red stars sitting under the CS neutral, and even though these look remarkably similar, actually the CS neutral has a higher carbon concentration than either of the other 2. So CS improved and PFLA were actually more similar in their carbon concentration than to each other than they were to CS neutral. So not particularly high carbon concentrations in the PFLA soils when they were sampled. And similarly for the soil phosphorus, the PFLA levels were more similar to that for improved grassland than they were for to those for neutral grassland. So I think these findings were a little bit surprising for the PFLA, but what I would say is that above ground vegetation responses tend to be much faster than below ground soil responses to management. So vegetation can quite quickly change, and it may take a bit longer for soil to change with management. A key finding, which may not seem very key, was that vegetation was significantly taller in the PFLA plots than in either of the other grassland types, and that shows that it's managed quite differently. So you are getting it grazed quite differently to the other grassland, and that's significant because tall grass is a really important resource for lots of bugs, and thereby implication for birds and for mammals that use those. So that was quite a significant finding. Here we go again. So the take home was that neutral grassland has a lower P, higher species richness and higher soil seed and improved. PFLA grassland doesn't yet have all the qualities of neutral grassland, but it appears to be on the way. I'm so sorry about these. So second one, this was looking at fungal community. So we used eDNA essentially from the bacteria and the fungal communities. And what I want you to take from this graph is that on the left is the bacteria, on the right is the fungi. And we found that we looked at different ages of pasture. We asked the farmers how long it was since they had ploughed and resown their pasture. And these are the categories: less than 10 years, greater than 20 years, less than 50 years, greater than 50 years. And what you can see is that on the right, the fungal communities looked quite different if the pasture was either less than 10 years since it had been ploughed or more than 50 years since it had been ploughed. So there's obviously something going on with that kind of management that disrupts fungal communities and gives you a completely different suite of fungi. You know, with the PFLA, we did actually have some examples of this more than 50 years pasture, which was great because we might be encountering it in the countryside survey, but we don't know because we don't have that management data. But what we found also was that fertilizer application reduced the variation in the fungal communities that we found. There were more fungi results, but they're very complicated. So I'm not showing you the graphs, but they basically showed that there was a lot more interaction between fungi and the vegetation parameters and soil chemistry than there were between the bacteria and those factors. So fungi is clearly an important component of soils, PFLA soils. So in terms of socioeconomic assessments, we carried out some interviews with 17 PFLA farmers. So we had a social scientist and she talked about the farmers about being part of PFLA and what it meant to them. And she found that the Google-led farmer group, which I mentioned as one of the early interventions by the PFLA, was highlighted by several of the interviewees. And you can see that they described the group as brilliant, totally helpful, trustworthy, strong cooperative ethos. And so my social science colleague concluded that it was really clear that social goods of learning, generosity to others, trust, really generated through this flow and exchange of on-farm trials, results and experiences was really valuable to farmers. So she also specifically interviewed about grazing practices because we were trying to evaluate mob grazing effects. And I haven't included a lot of slides on that. I can tell you something about it, but it's pretty much summarised here. Only one of the farmers was really intensively mob grazing, as in the American examples you might have heard about. And that's his mob grazing down in the photo there. He's just moved his off of the looking at the part of the field that looks grazed into a relatively small paddock. He kept his herds in pretty small paddocks and moved them frequently. The other farmers we interviewed were very much on a journey of experimenting and learning about what might work on their particular farm. Some farmers were more very concerned about welfare, and they would probably not have used this method on their farms. This farmer felt it worked with what he had, what his environment was like. But you can see that the having a go and trying something different really did excite this farmer, and indeed it excited lots of the other farmers. And you can see he says there, I'll let you just read the quote. So this farmer was also an electrician, able to set out automatically releasing gates, which was really useful for him, because I know when I was down there in the summer, he had them set up to move 7 times in one day. So yeah, the sort of innovation, the excitement of doing something different was evident with him and with several others of the farmers that we interviewed. So the sort of other conclusions from the interviews were really that the farmers felt that they were leading the way. They were taking their own direction forward and not dependent on the government to sort of set their future. We found that beef farming is really diverse, and it's complex and really not reflected in the media. There's this one image of intensive practice, which was definitely not what we saw. We felt that through working with the PFLA, farmers were feeling changes in themselves and how they farm and what they pay attention to and what they feel their role is in society. We found that lots of them had much less emphasis on infrastructure and subsidy than other farmers, and they were keeping things very simple. Yeah, this was a really key quote, I think, that farmers were positive, proactive and creative in terms of finding solutions that work for them and for their businesses. Really learning from one another, enjoying the support, the Google Forum, local meetings, Groundswell, the Oxford Farming Conference, national and international meetings. And also thinking beyond the farm gate, really thinking about marketing and supply chain, certification, abattoirs, etc. So another quote you might want to read. So farmers are really thinking about linking their species-rich grasslands to viable businesses. Viability of the businesses. So we did look at this. We looked at the viability of beef suckler herds. We looked at gross margins per suckler cow. On the left, the blue bars are the PFLA farms. The very most left is the average of all of the farms, and then they're split into bottom third, middle third, top third, and compared on the right to the yellow farm business survey performance. And you can see that for those gross margins per suckler cow, they're really quite a bit higher than the farm business ones on the right, and quite a bit higher, well, quite a lot higher for the top third of producers. But even sort of as a mean tend to be much higher. And we looked at output and variable costs per suckler cow, and as you'd expect, if your variable costs are high, then your outputs are lower. So the top third were the ones who managed that best, but again, overall on average higher than the farm business survey figures. For sheep, less pronounced difference. So again, the farm business survey in the yellow and the farm business survey for organic in the green there, because we felt that was quite comparable to the PFLA. And you can see they are quite comparable in terms of their results there. Similarly, again, the output and variable costs are higher. Your variable costs, the lower your output, but the PFLA did particularly well on that, so their variable costs tend to be quite a bit lower. and some results, sort of some conclusions on that. There was quite a lot of variability across the PFLA farmers, high costs in the beef sector, a result of increased processing and marketing costs. But overall, the PFLA were outperforming the Farm Business Survey sample. We felt that the key reasons were that they had higher prices through direct sales and less production inputs, particularly for sheep. Goodness, the slides have calmed down. So we did a holistic assessment using something called the Public Goods Tool, which is now going to be the global farm metric going forward. And what we did was this is something invented by the Organic Research Centre, and we used it on all of the 56 farms, and we had some incredibly patient farmers who dug out their data for us and sat and answered lots of questions around agri-environment management, landscape and heritage, soil, water, fertiliser and farm waste, energy and carbon, food systems, agricultural systems diversity, social capital, farm business resilience, animal health and welfare. So on all of these axes, they were asked quite a number of questions to gather useful data. And if you look at the diagram, the grey line around which is sitting in the green circle, were the highest scores we got from any farmer. So there were some very high scores on those axes. The lowest scores are the orange line in the orange part of the circle. So there are also some very low scores on some of those axes, or fairly low scores, although none of them go into the firing pit in the middle. But the average were the blue ones. So what we were finding was that for the PFLA, the highest scoring spurs tended to be the animal health and welfare, indicating that the farmers were paying a lot of attention to that, soil and agri-environment management. They did well on those. The lowest scoring spurs were agricultural systems diversity, but that is not that surprising because we were targeting beef and sheep farmers, so they were often just that and not something else. And systems diversity looks at whether you've also got some arable land or you've got some goats or chickens or whatever else. Energy and carbon and water management were also a little bit lower, but a lot of variability in some areas like the systems diversity, food system, fertiliser management. These wheels were what we gave back to farmers to say, this is what your farm looked like in this public goods tool. But I would say that this exercise was really about talking to farmers about how they manage their farm, helping them to think about what data they collect and helping them to think about how they perform in different areas and what they might be able to do to change, to enhance performance, and not so much about getting a score for them. So we did, however, try to use the scores in a sort of scientific way to say, okay, what do these tell us? So what we wanted to know is, are there some farms that do really well on lots of the things we've been measuring? So we measured plants. So at the very bottom of this green graph, there are costs on the left, grass height, species richness, number of forbs, how long they've been members of the PFLA, whether or not they had subsidies, their carbon, soil carbon, loss on ignition, LOI that stands for, their outputs, their gross margins, whether they're in agri-environment schemes. So this is very much, I have a look, are there farms that do really well on lots of these? Are there farms that don't do so well? And are there some in the middle? And you can see that we kind of clustered them into these three clusters. This is just done statistically, and cluster one tended to be, these farms were the ones with the highest values for environmental indicators. They were also the ones that have been the PFLA members for the longest. The ones in the middle were highly variable in terms of environmental indicators, and they tended to be the ones that had been in farm membership sort of a medium number of years, and those at the bottom were relative newcomers. So we weren't really sure if we'd find anything, but we did find something. Again, as I said, when you start doing messy science with loads and loads of variables coming in, it's hard to get patterns because you have so many bits of data coming in. But we were pleased to be able to see some pattern there. Another part of this assessment was just to see if we could relate any of the variables to one another. So if you were species-rich swards, did you also have, lots of visitors, or did you lose less livestock? So in this analysis, we found some interaction across variables. And what we did find was that if you had species-rich grasslands, total costs and farm spend on veterinary medicines and vet fees were lower. So that was kind of interesting. Income from livestock was highly correlated with total gross margin. That wasn't very surprising. The level of participation in agri-environment schemes was really correlated with the number of visitors. So people taking on schemes were also happy to have people come in and visit the farm. And we also found that as housing condition increased, the amount of lost livestock decreased. So there were we could find some patterns in that data. So just going to conclude really. So pasture-fed livestock were clearly delivering a wide range of public goods, our farmers. With the farmers and not the government were leading the way. They're deciding what they wanted for them from their farms and driving change. They're really learning from one another, enjoying support and from various different forums and from each other. And these collaboration, local networks and support for new entrants was really key. And we found that they're also really thinking beyond the farm about marketing, supply chain, certification, and abattoir networks. And that's it. Thank you for listening and bearing with me while my slides changed themselves. You can see it's a big project, lots of people, and many thanks to all those who participated. Okay, thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. And I've heard you present SeekSlip a couple of times, and there was a couple of things that you then just presented that I hadn't picked up before. So it's always really great to kind of hear additional things, particularly around species richness increasing and cost and vet med going down. That's a really interesting one that I'm definitely going to share with a few vet pals as well. Okay, so I think we won't have questions yet. We'll go to Lawrence and then we'll have questions at the end. There's a few coming in on the chat, so we'll pick those up as we go through. But Lawrence, if I can hand over to you, and I think you're going to talk a bit about pathways and possibly other projects that are happening at the moment, maybe reflect a little bit back on SeekSlip as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Can you hear me? Is the sound working all right?
Yeah, sound is perfect.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to present today. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you all. And yeah, I'm Lawrence Smith. I'm a lecturer at Reading University. I'm also a visiting researcher at SLU, the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and that's where I am at the moment. It's a bit colder up here than it is down there, I think, but yeah, it's still very nice. Yeah, thanks very much for the invite to talk to you today about pathways, and it follows on really nicely from the SeekSlip work, because SeekSlip and Lisa's work more generally as well on sort of socio-ecological systems really provided a lot of inspiration for the Pathways project in terms of learning from innovative practitioners and thinking about sustainability through a sort of socio-ecological lens. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully this is working. Is that working all right? Is that
Oh, no, that's gone. It was there and it disappeared.
okay? How about now?
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, so the project's called Pathways, which stands for Pathways for Transitions to Sustainability in Livestock Husbandry and Food Systems, and I'm the coordinator. Yeah, this is just a quick overview of the early results of the project, although we're only just under halfway through. So I'm going to talk actually bit more about the process and focus a bit less on the results, but there are some really interesting early results coming out already that I'll include here. Yeah, so what is Pathways in terms of the project? It's a €9 million initiative funded by the EU under Horizon 2020, and it's coordinated by SLU, and we've got 31 partners right across Europe, and it's a really diverse mix of partners. We have universities, research centres, and industry partners like the PFL, Biodynamic Federation, as well as ALA and other sort of multinationals involved in a sort of multi-actor approach. And that's something that's really encouraged within the European research area in terms of interacting with industry on the ground to sort of try and understand drivers and barriers to change, in particular through interacting with these stakeholders. But our aim is to inform policy essentially with regards to livestock in Europe. We're also improving research methods and informing business strategies to support transition to sustainable production and consumption. And so we started in September 2021. And then these are our objectives, which you can see here. So we're improving sustainability assessment methods in particular to enable a more sort of robust analysis of livestock systems. And then we're evaluating innovations within livestock systems. So this is where we're really building on SeedSlip, because we're sort of taking that concept that Lisa was talking about and expanding it across Europe, essentially through learning from innovators. And then the third objective is to co-design scenarios and transition pathways with multi-actors. And the fourth objective is to support a transition to sustainability. So you can see here with this bow tie image, the sort of stages of work that we've been carrying out, and we are here. So we're just under halfway through this process that will lead to sort of pathway identification. And all throughout this process, we're engaging with these 31 organizations across Europe and a broader sort of community of practice as well, to make sure that the scenarios and the evaluation methods we develop are relevant. So we've got 4 key components in the project, which are really central to all of the work we're doing. And the first component is what we've called practice hubs, which are essentially groups of innovative farmers across Europe. And these farmers encompass PFLA members and also and innovators who are working with sort of agri-tech in Spain, for example, as well as sort of mountain pasture or transhumance graziers in Italy, and everything in between. So we have a range of innovations from sort of agroecology to agri-tech and everything in between. And we're really trying to learn from what these farmers are doing on the ground. At a policy level, we're also engaging with the NGO research and policymaker community through a multi-actor platform. And those interactions, although it's shown face-to-face here, they're mainly online because it's an international platform. And we're sort of feeding the results back from our practice hub evaluations with that group. And the third aspect of the project, which we're just starting now actually, is living labs, which sort of following the field lab model that some of you may be familiar with, where we're actually implementing small-scale research projects with a budget of around or less than €20,000, where individual farmer groups are working to tackle a particular research question, working with the researchers in the project over the next 2 years. So those projects are just getting started. And then the fourth aspect is a community of practice. So we're engaging with the wider public around the livestock systems and how they could look in 2050. So this is the structure. So we've got 9 work packages, and if we just sort of start on the top left, and what we're doing in work package 3 and 4 is developing new measurements and models for welfare, biodiversity, emissions, and consumer aspects around current and future diets. And then these new measurements and models are being incorporated within this sort of mixing bowl, so to speak, on the right, where we're improving life cycle assessment methods, the assessments of the circular economy at a regional scale, and supply chain modeling at a sort of national, international scale. And this is informing the development of and assessment of scenarios in work package 2. And then this is also nested within a sort of multi-actor process. Knowledge exchange is sort of building on this work as well. So yeah, scenarios are kind of central to this aspect or to this work. So there's been a big focus on developing these scenarios that will be evaluated with the improved modeling approaches over the last 18 months or so. And so the scenario development that we're doing in Pathways, it's essentially looking at what livestock could look like in 2050, and sort of starting with a 2020 baseline at the bottom here. So I guess that should say current rather than past maybe, but anyway, this is the sort of time frame we're working with. And then we're applying this evaluation framework through these improved modeling tools to look at a whole host of aspects in terms of GHG emissions, biodiversity, and economic and social animal welfare aspects, as well as food sovereignty. And then the other aspect of the work is looking at transition pathways, so looking at how we can get from here to there, basically, in terms of business models, technology, and policy. So this has been a big focus of our work, and there's been a lot of interaction with stakeholders in designing scenarios that address these aspects. And what we've come out with is sort of 5 storylines or narratives, which I'll just try and summarize here quickly into just in view of time. But essentially, the first narrative or scenario that we've come up with is an agroecological one, where we're suggesting that feed-food competition will be reduced to a minimum, and agro-biodiversity conservation is integrated into agriculture. The second scenario is a sort of sustainable intensification narrative, where the focus is on essentially producing more from less. The third scenario is around rural renaissance. So this is essentially a restructuring of rural communities and restructuring of supply chains in particular, and farmer autonomy is a key aspect of this scenario in terms of direct marketing, for example. High animal welfare is another scenario that we developed, where the objective of this is to maximize the positive experience of animals through various means. And then the fifth narrative is a counterfactual for the others. So we're using a stock-free Europe scenario to identify what we miss when livestock disappears. So obviously that's a very extreme scenario, or you could say the others are also pretty extreme, but this is particularly extreme, and we're using it to sort of see what we lose when livestock isn't present with these improved models. So that's been one key aspect of the work, and another aspect has been improving LCA, life cycle assessment methods, to better represent livestock systems. And for the uninitiated, I thought I'd just summarize what LCA is all about. So essentially, it's a process to assess all of the environmental impacts that are associated with a product, process, or activity. So it's quite nicely summarized in this image, which shows a production system, which in this case would be a farm, and all of the inputs that come into that system in terms of fertilizer and so on. And all of those impacts are captured within a life cycle analysis and expressed using the categories shown on the right in terms of impacts per functional unit, so products and co-products. So yeah, that's a summary of the sort of LCA process. And why are we focusing on LCA? Well, it's a really popular method, and there's been a huge explosion in the uptake of LCA, particularly within the agri-food sector, as you can see from this slide. So the number of studies has increased exponentially from sort of 2005 onwards, in particular, and it's really something that policymakers like, in the sense that they like the numbers, and it's a standardized method as well. It's enshrined in ISO standards, so that sort of gives it a degree of authority, and hence a couple of reasons why it's extremely popular. So so there's a sort of a responsibility to sort of make sure we're doing justice to livestock systems with LCA, and we're trying to address that here. And these are a couple of the key reasons why we're doing this. So a product-based approach that's common in LCA doesn't capture the range of ecosystem services that are relevant to, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. And also with this sort of input-output approach, it tends to favor high-input agricultural systems that produce higher yields but produce fewer ecosystem services. So we're trying to address these key research questions in Pathways, so how to better represent livestock in LCA and the most appropriate methods for this. So we've been through a lot of expert consultation, in particular building on current evaluation frameworks that are used within the sort of sustainability literature and within existing LCA frameworks. So we pulled these together through literature review and sent out the criteria that can be used to evaluate LCA to experts. and we use this to identify the key things that we should be looking for in an LCA of livestock systems. And these were the criteria that were prioritized. So in particular, transparency and reproducibility around making sure that it's clear in terms of the method that's being used, completeness in terms of capturing the whole range of impact categories that are included within LCA, and fairness and acceptance was a key aspect as well in terms of the uptake and use of the LCA method, and robustness was also mentioned, particularly around the use of uncertainty analysis to sort of clearly express the sort of bounds of uncertainty in results of LCAs, which are sometimes, or often I should say, missing from LCAs, which can be misleading because it doesn't give you an idea of the how uncertain some of these aspects are, which I would say very uncertain in many cases. So so that was a key aspect. And yeah, separate accuracy criterion was also suggested. So essentially this was saying that LCAs should try and include a validation of the some of the equations that are used in the models in terms of showing how that's linked to empirical work or experimental work that's taken place prior. The other aspect is around soil carbon. So there's a lot of uncertainty associated with that, and we're trying to address that separately. Yeah, the other aspect that's been brought to light through the research on LCA methods essentially is that we're pretty good in the LCA community at sort of capturing these linear processes in terms of the impacts associated with the extraction of inputs that come in to sort of cropping and livestock systems, and then on to the sort of consumption phase. But we're not so good at capturing these sort of recycling or circular aspects. So the in this image, the red arrows in terms of food processing and how that can be integrated within cropping systems and capturing some of those biophysical aspects within LCA is really challenging and poorly represented at the moment. Similarly, the interactions between agro-industry and livestock with regard to feed, for example. So these red arrows, so to speak, we're trying to address at the moment through improved methods, and we're addressing these key topics through literature review and expert consultation again, particularly around the circularity in LCA, but also trying to capture these ecosystem service aspects around biodiversity, soil carbon sequestration, and then also picking up on animal welfare and other aspects listed here through this sort of structured review approach. Yeah, so these improved methods, once they've been identified, we'll be applying to these case studies or practice hubs, as they're called, in pathways of innovation. And we're also applying these improved methods to baseline systems, which are being defined across Europe through surveys, data analysis, and existing data sets like the FADN and Farm Business Survey to act as a counterfactual. Yeah, so what's coming next in the project? So we've got a key challenge now in terms of translating our scenarios or narratives into model parameters. So we're incorporating a range of models in addition to LCA. So the magnet model, which is a CG computerized generalized equilibrium model of economics at a national and international scales. So we'll be applying these scenarios in that much larger scale modeling approach, as well as within this supply chain approach or value chain method within LCA. And also we'll be applying these scenarios at a value chain level more qualitatively in terms of thinking about power dynamics that exist within the standard system and innovative models. So yeah, translating the scenarios is a key challenge for us. And the next step as well is also to build on the work that we've done in SeedSlip with the PG tool data. So we'll be analyzing data from about 100 farms that we've collected over the last 18 months or so, in particular to look at the scores across these PG categories. But also, this is a slide Lisa showed earlier, we'll be using the raw data within the tool to look at the relationship correlations, in particular across these different areas, in particular like grass and species richness, for example, and the relationships of that with total costs and spend on veterinary medicines, for example. So this was work we did in the SeedSlip project that we'll be building on. Other aspects that are coming up include the communication outputs and activities. So we'll be continuing to update the video hubs. There's a lot of videos actually already on our project website that talk about LCA, for example, as a method, and the circular economy aspects within pathways that are being incorporated within improved models, as well as a host of other topics. So that's a really useful resource to check out if you want to go and have a look there. And we've also got a webinar coming up on the 12th of December with Todd Crane from ILRI around the future of livestock systems, and then a face-to-face interaction on the 7th of March in Brussels, where we'll be presenting more early results from our scenario evaluations. And I should say that we do actually have budget to cover travel costs up to a limited number of people, I should say on a sort of first come, first served basis. So if you wanted to attend this forum in Brussels, do get in touch with me in the first instance. And there is resource available if you wanted to hear about the work we're doing in more depth. But in summary, yeah, we're evaluating these scenarios to inform trajectories in Europe, and trying to make methods fit for purpose. And we're also carrying out these innovation assessments to try and identify what works in a range of contexts. And yeah, if you could engage with us in this process, it will sort of maximize the impact and synergies. So yeah, do get in touch and join us on these dates. And the best, I think we have a fantastic team of researchers who've put together all of the work I've presented. And thank you to everybody who's engaged with the project. And the best way to keep track of what we're doing is to follow us on social media, and or LinkedIn and Twitter, now X. I can't bring myself to change the logo to the new X logo, but yeah, it's at Pathways Europe if you want to be kept up to speed with our activities. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Lawrence, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant to get an overview of where Pathways is, and it being when you're within a project, and I'm sure others in the audience who are involved in research will recognize that when you're inside a project, sometimes it feels like it's such a big machine that you're kind of in this tiny bit of a cog, and being able to step back and understand how the whole project is moving forward is really, really great to see. So we have some questions. I also have some, and I'm delighted that Brad Curran has asked the question that I always bang on about. And if Simon Mokes was still in the if Simon was still here in the audience, he'd probably be rolling his eyes at me, going on again about the consideration for the benefits of livestock as an integral part of organic rotations, e.g. grazing herbal lays during that part of the rotation, because my understanding of it is that currently a lot of the modelling that's happening really struggles to understand that livestock can graze, for example, cover crops in the same year that you're getting an arable crop from that ground. And quite often we're separating within a lot of this modelling work, grassland over here for livestock and arable over here for arable crops, and it's difficult to combine those. So maybe Lawrence and Lisa, between you, can you speak to this point about how are we able to kind of model and consider the integration of livestock into systems?
I'm going to leave that one to Lawrence, because I think he studies the life cycle analysis model. I do think I agree with you, Nikki. I would ask the same question, actually. I think it's very difficult to take in the complexity of these systems, but Lawrence will have an answer, hopefully.
Yeah, it's it's really tricky one to do. I suppose the root of it, the trickiness, I suppose, is that LCA, life cycle analysis, kind of came from an industrial past, so to speak. So it's designed for these very linear systems, and this aspect of integrating a herbal lay into a rotation, that's kind of a much more circular one, and that LCA struggles with. So yeah, it's really tricky. I suppose I would say that there's an implicit aspect to that, in the sense that the increased resource use efficiency of having a herbal lay in a system will definitely get picked up in an LCA. So to previous LCA work I've done on organic farming, for instance, we found that that beef produced within organic systems was actually a lot more efficient per kilo of product than the conventional alternative, because of the fertilizer avoidance, basically. So, and that was largely due to the use of clover and other legumes in lays. And similarly with herbal lays, you'd find a sort of similar thing potentially. So yeah, that's more of an implicit aspect. The other aspect of incorporating that system is obviously the carbon sequestration but it's sort of fair to say there's a lot of disagreement at the moment in terms of how you can best capture that in LCA. So we're sort of trying to address that, as I say, through this review and consultation, and come out with the best inverted commas method. But yeah, we're not there yet on the carbon side of things, but I hope that can capture the complexity within sort of lay arable systems more generally. When we sort of finalised the result and the process we want to use.
Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, I guess the answer to all of these questions is it's really complex. And one of the things that I worry about because of that complexity is actually, I would say that within the academic community, there is much more recognition of the need for holistic assessment, as you pointed out, Lisa and Lawrence, obviously, as you're pushing forward with pathways on the European level. And we really understand that it's really important, but I don't necessarily see that translating into policy at the moment. So I'm interested from both of your thoughts on whether you're, I'm quite cynical about this, but maybe you're seeing that change happen. You're being asked for your advice more frequently by policymakers that's taking into account more holistic assessments. Is that something that's happening, or do you share my concerns that maybe the policy levers are going in one direction, and actually academics are really trying to understand and establish these more holistic examples?
Do you want me to go first? I am. We are getting asked by policy a lot more. There is recognition, but it's how they actually do it. You pay farmers for practices at the moment. For the agri-environment schemes, you sign up for. I'll have lays, I'll have herbal lays, or I'll do this, I'll do that. And there is a real, and they are fully aware that there are often perverse outcomes of those kind of implementations, and but and they've been made aware, and they are aware of them. But I don't know, apart from they can support organic farming because it's a certified system, and we've really strongly pushed to make sure that they are supporting that system with the new schemes. I think they just find it harder where it's a more a less tangible, definitive, yes, we'll pay you for doing that practice, because I suppose it's they're paying for the money has got to be properly audited and checked that farmers are actually doing what they say they're doing. So yeah, I think there are problems there.
Thanks, Lisa. Lawrence, any thoughts on that? Reflections?
Yeah, I'd agree with everything Lisa just said. And I suppose I was at a policy forum in Brussels last week, and it was really encouraging to hear about the interest in holistic science, basically from the head of DG Agri, Wolfgang Birch. Probably mispronounced his last name, but he was. And others from DG Agri, they were really keen to hear about results from pathways as a, one approach, which is trying to apply holistic methods, and that really was very encouraging. Very encouraging. Obviously, we're not in the EU anymore in the UK, but there seems in the European research area there seems to be a big interest in holistic science, so to speak, in terms of how we can evaluate trade-offs. But it's difficult. It's really difficult to capture all of those impacts in a robust manner, and it's something we struggled a bit with the PG tool, in the sense that you're trying to cover so much in such a short space of time. It's quite difficult, but very necessary.
Thanks, Lawrence. There are some other questions that are coming through in the chat, but we're really running out of time. There's a question that Julia asked about work being done to show that the organisms in the gut of ruminants are contributory to the health of soil food web, and that's something that the Bionutrient Institute are doing in the US, and we've been, as Pasture for Life, engaging with that study. So Julia, keep an eye out for when we start publishing some of that. Hopefully that will be coming soon. And I think, there's a lot of discussion about kind of merit in encouraging farmers to kind of use tools, to use measuring apps, that sort of thing, to try and better understand and articulate what's going on their farms, and particularly like Merlin for birds, Soil Mentor for soil health. And I think the more that farmers are able to take that into their own hands to demonstrate what's happening on their farms, the better. I had so many other questions, but I've realized we've just got to 10:30, so we've completely run out of time. I'm so grateful for both of you, Lawrence and Lisa, for coming along and sharing your work with us this morning. I really wanted to get into the kind of detail of, well, what does this mean? Is it feasible to have 100% pasture-fed ruminants across the UK? But I guess the jury's out because it's so complex. And that's what's difficult about kind of making these assumptions, is it's really, really difficult to answer those questions. But maybe that's one for another time. Again, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thanks everyone for coming along and taking part, and for your questions and discussion in the chat. It was really enjoyable. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Nikki. Cheers.